Hey everyone, thank you so much. We have some amazing people here. Welcome to our webinar about how leading companies are attracting underrepresented talent. In a recent study from Lever, 50% of recruiters are making diversity, equity, and inclusion more of a priority in light of the pandemic. Hopefully much more than that. We know a lot of organizations are focusing on hiring talent from underrepresented communities, underrepresented backgrounds. But the question that we're looking at today is, how do we really authentically tell the employer brand story? How do we engage with candidates? So today, the webinar is hosted and co-hosted by Single Sprout and All Voices. Single Sprout, I'm a co-founder, co-CEO there. We are a tech-powered recruiting firm that focuses on growing diverse tech teams that are solving some of the world's most challenging problems. Some context around All Voices. All Voices is an always-on employee listening tool used to ensure a culture of trust, inclusion, and transparency at companies around the world. I'm going to pass it to our panelists, but we have some fantastic people that I am big fans of, friends of. We have Jasmine Francis, Senior Director, People and Culture at Thinks. We have Joy Young, Senior Director, People at Slice. We have Jess Osro, Co-founder, The Rise Journey, and Head of Learning and Org Development at Quartet Health. And we have Sarah Castle, People and Talent Dev Lead at Cypress.io. So some of the best, some of the most thoughtful experience in the industry when it comes to employer branding, recruiting, people, DEI, and HR. And I'd love to start off with an icebreaker. So I'm going to start with Jasmine, then going to Joy, then Jess, then Sarah. And the icebreaker is going to be, what was your favorite interview question or experience?
Yes. So here we go. I would say that at one point I was interviewing with an organization and I thought a lot of them. And the hiring manager, when she was listing out exactly what the process would be as far as who I would be interviewing, she said, I want to make sure that you also get the opportunity to interview with another Black woman so that you have the opportunity to see from that perspective exactly what it feels like working here and what some of the challenges are. And I thought that that was mind-blowing. And I thought that it said a lot about her and the organization.
Okay. So for me, I think, obviously I've recently joined Slice, and that was a really good interview process. I like that they kind of laid out the structure. So I knew up front what to expect and manage those expectations all the way throughout. And, I got the opportunity to meet with a variety of people across the organization, which was very helpful. I think one of the best questions, though, that I was asked was, why shouldn't we hire you? Which I found very interesting because I never had that before. And I had to think a little bit about that, but definitely enjoyed that process. So.
For me, I've led a number of interview processes, so I felt like nothing could surprise me when it came to interviewing. And I got a question about what was the most difficult personality you've had to deal with, and can you walk me through a situation when you had to deal with them and how did you resolve it? And I appreciate anybody who goes past the nonsense within interviewing and right into a kind of a no BS, let's get to know you and how you deal with stuff mentality. It also forced me, somebody who's a little bit more emotional, to take a step back and remove emotion from it so I can really discuss the process. But I really appreciated that they just dove right into a really human element.
I have to say my favorite interview process was with the company I'm currently at now. And they were just super thoughtful and really, it was a combination of just really wanting to understand my aspirations and where I wanted to go in my career. And also, I think asking questions along similar lines as Jess, based on my conversations with the different people I interviewed with, what they felt like would be good working styles, but also might come up as challenges. And so they really wanted to get to know me as a person, and that was really.
Thanks for sharing that. The goal here today is obviously to learn, to gain more education. I'm sure even our panelists will learn from each other. My personal goal is for each person that's attending to hopefully take away one practical tip that they can go and apply today. I think talking about it is great. I think awareness is great, but if we don't do the action, we're not going to make changes. And so the goal here is to come away at least with one thing, if not with many things, that you can come back to your company and apply today or tomorrow or next week. And so together we can make that change. So first question that we are going to get into, and we're going to kind of go with a storyline of the interview process, but it all starts at the beginning. And what role an organization in their brand, in their website, in their social media, what role does an organization play in attracting underrepresented talent? I'm going to throw this one to Jasmine.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really good question. And I can definitely share what my personal experience has been like. During the time when I was interviewing, I did take the time to look to see what an organization was doing. Were they speaking out about injustices that were happening across the world, across America? That was, I would say, the number one thing. I think that employers should be thoughtful about taking a stance in support of inclusivity as it relates to their employee population. I don't think that that's the only reason they do it, but I do think that that's important. Also, in your branding, am I seeing, employees of all different ethnicities, races, abilities, etc.? That's really important. Additionally, the leadership team. What does the leadership team look like? It's really important to make sure that you have people of color on your board in senior leadership positions, because those are the people who are really going to be able to give a really strong and accurate voice for those underrepresented employees. And so I wanted to know, can I have somebody who's going to speak up for me, who's going to show up at the table for me? And then also just following, the LinkedIn, and just following the organization. What's the vibe that I'm getting? How does this organization make me feel? When I look at their branding, do I feel tense? Do I feel and so being aware of all of those things, I think, is really important. And so employers need to be very thoughtful and through a lens of to ensure that they are attracting.
Thanks, Jasmine. I think that's really interesting, and just regurgitating that, speaking out against injustices, but not just to speak out, obviously, hopefully with some action, with some thought in there. Does the team have people of color, different backgrounds, different ethnicities? Does the leadership team, does the board have that? What if the team doesn't have that?
If the team doesn't have that, it's not a deal breaker. I think a lot of organizations are just now kind of moving in a space of recognizing the importance of making sure that people of different backgrounds have a seat at the table. For me, to your point, it's more about, okay, if we don't have the right representation at the top, then tell me what your organization is actually doing to get better in that space. Tell me what your DEI strategy looks like, and tell me where you want to go, what's your vision. If you can be able to articulate to me where you're going and your plan of action to get there, that to me is more important than your current state.
Amazing. Do you think, we'll move on right after this, but do you think that should be, the DEI strategy should be on website, social media, should that be published?
That's a really good question. I say My inclination is to say yes. However, I think that organizations need to be thoughtful about what they share on their websites. I don't think that there's a need to share explicit numbers, to share explicit details, but I think the overarching strategy with business points to say we want to work towards having a more inclusive leadership representation. We want to ensure that programming and organization aligns to everyone and not only specific people. I mean, having that overarching strategy, I think is great if organizations do that. And then once they attract the underrepresented and they're in, then you can have more insight into what details looks like in practice.
Thank you. Thanks so much. Moving on, final question on the branding side. How can you show underrepresented talent what's going on internally and externally? Kind of a follow-up to that question. What tools are you using? This one is for Jess.
Just really quickly jumping back to Jasmine in the last piece. I fall very liberally on the transparency spectrum when it comes to DEI and strategy. And I am actually in favor of organizations should be mandatory to publish your DEI information, should be mandatory to have that on there, as well as when you talk about talents. As somebody who identifies as white, cisgendered, I'm about as, basic white girl as you can get who works in the DEI space. And it's really vital for me to say, how can I ally? How can I support? And part of that is publishing the numbers, because you can't get better until you publish the numbers. And so when you talk about tools, you should be talking about tools that you're using, such as All Voices. How are you making people feel safe at your organization? Talking about psychological safety in the workplace. How are you measuring things? Are you measuring things using your HRIS? How are you measuring things using your ATS? What additional platforms? How you're using those data and what platforms you're using is really important to share, especially if somebody doesn't know about it. Not everybody's going to be data driven, but as part of Jasmine mentioned, like sharing the process and how you're getting there, sharing what tools you're using is important. And people can then research the tools and kind of see what you're backing up with it. So I think it's really important when you think about tools, also thinking about them in cohesion. And in addition to tools, also looking at your internal programming. And I kind of see those as tools as part of your branding. What are your ERGs doing? What are your DEI committees doing? Do they have a page on your careers page? Why aren't you sharing this incredible content and this culture boost that you have internally, externally? I read a great little Instagram meme or whatever that was like, why are you asking me as the candidate for 3 references? I should be asking you as the organization for 3 references. Give me 3 employees who I can talk to, real talk, about what's going on. And so how do you give those 3 references or 6 references or 100 references in advance before they even get to the pipeline? How are you using your ATS to make sure that when your information flow goes out in those templated emails, stuff that you can send, like put and send away, that it's consistent and you're sharing more and more information as somebody goes through the pipeline? So thinking about using your tools and automation is also going to be really vital, because DEI should be built into everything. It's not an HR responsibility. It's not a recruitment responsibility, but you have to do it in a scalable way. So figuring out your platforms, figuring out how they can work together, figuring out your internal tools and platforms such as DEI councils and ERGs, and then putting that out there. And for anybody who's on the fence about publishing your DEI data, do it. It provides yourself a benchmark and holds yourself accountable. It might not be pretty, and that is okay. That is part of your story, and you can tell it and you can own it and you can figure out where you need to grow, but you got to own it before you can go anywhere. And using your platforms is.
Thanks, Jess. This is a follow-up question on that, because you talked about publishing numbers, publishing tools, ATS. Let's say I'm starting from scratch today. I'm less than 20 people, but this is a huge priority. What's one tool? What's one number that I should be talking about that I can start?
Yeah, whenever I throw this back to clients or even internally at Quartet, I say, what is the end goal? What are you trying to show? Are you trying to show that you're racially diverse? Are you trying to show that you're ethnically diverse? Are you trying to show that you have people at different levels? And so going back to what is important for you to show, thinking about how does it relate to your values? Because ultimately, as a 20-person organization or even as a 1,000-person organization, you can't show everything. So you really need to figure out, as part of your narrative, what is important for you to share and have people understand externally, whether it's a client or a candidate, or maybe a candidate in 2 years from now. Figuring that out. I think there's a lot of different ways to figure out, or a lot of different metrics to choose from, and I'm sure a lot of people on the panel today have different ideas on what metrics are important. But I always go back to the company and their core values. And what do you want to show and what is important for you, both what you're doing good at, what you're not doing good at, and where you're going. So I don't really necessarily, I always throw a question back.
Thanks. Sarah, any thoughts there?
No, I think everything that's been said is, I am aligned with it all. And I think another thing to think about is just what's creating the employee experience. So what benefits are you offering your employees and how are you spending your dollars? Where are you spending your dollars? Are you thinking about, putting your money into something that would be like a sugar high benefit? Or are you actually thinking about how are you supporting parents right now during COVID? How are you supporting employees that have to go into the office and don't have the luxury of working from home? How are you creating equitable frameworks to make sure that all of your employees are getting the resources that they need? As well as what is leadership doing? So I love the, being really transparent about the DEI strategy, and also what are leaders personally committed to in terms of creating an anti-racist, inclusive organization. What are they doing to educate themselves, and how are they pushing this work forward, not just in the company, but in their personal life too? I think that's really important in showing accountability. And, it's an OKR, like it's built into what is expected. Yeah.
Thanks. Before we close the topic on branding, Joy, anything you want to follow up with? Anything that we missed? Any thoughts there?
No, I mean, I think Jess and Sarah kind of covered it. I like the transparency, and I really like when Jess talked about, if you're not doing anything right now, like talk to me about it. What are your plans going forward? Like, I want to see the hidden parts, but I also want to know that you have a plan. And I think that's helpful. I want transparency in the interview process, because, a lot of companies are struggling with how to do this and how to do this correctly. And so it's okay to say, we're still trying to figure it out. And but we are working towards something and making things better for the organization.
Thank you. Moving on to job descriptions. This one's for Jess. What's one common improvement to make to our job descriptions to be more inclusive? One improvement.
Most basic is just watching the language you're using. There's a number of tools, DEI.ai, and I'm terrible with names. So there's like 5 or 10 different tools out there to look at language and make sure that you're being inclusive. But also, I would say make sure you're explaining why you're removing language. We had our COO at Quartet Health not understand why you take out rock star out of a job description. And he genuinely didn't know. And, we had to work to explain it. So make sure that even if you're using these tools, that people understand the why behind it so that they learn and don't use it again. Otherwise, it's just going to keep happening. So that would be like the number one. The other one would be if you're going to have an EEO policy or EEOC policy or anything that says you're inclusive, put your money where your mouth is. Going back to Sarah's comment about benefits, are your benefits supporting that EEO policy? If you're talking about inclusion, what are you doing for accommodations for those? Are you offering accommodations proactively? And do you say that in your job description? An accommodation might not be for somebody for disabilities. It might be the working parent. It might be with somebody whose internet is crap like mine. There's a lot of different ways to think about it. But by mentioning it in the job description, you're opening up what was something that had blinders on it, all of a sudden to a whole bunch of people who may not have considered themselves in this space. And so that's really vital when you think about opening up your candidate.
Thanks. Anyone want to add anything? Jasmine, Sarah, Joy?
Sure. Can you all hear me better now? Yes, perfect. Sorry about that. I think Jess covered, probably the biggest thing. I would say the other is, and we may get to this point later in the discussion, but when you think about who you want to attract to your organization, do you want them to be exactly like everyone else that you have there, or do you want them to be different and have a different vision and a different approach and a different way of doing things, but they can still deliver in the way that you need them to deliver? And so with that, I think it's important to be thoughtful about the qualifications of a job on the job description. Do they really need to be from an Ivy League school? And how do you determine if that's better than not going to an Ivy League school? And plus, you also have to think, who has access to be able to go to an Ivy League school. And so how can you just ensure that, you know, the qualifications for a job are not based on where they come from, but it's based on what they can bring to the role. Can they actually deliver? And employers need to make sure that they're flexible on how this person could deliver.
Natan, just want to quickly jump in and second, third, and fourth that. And when you think about the systemic issues that go on within our world, within our country, within society, and when it comes to privilege, there was no doubt that I was going to go to college, and I was going to go to a good, expensive college. That is not the status quo for most Americans when you think about it. And so when you think about requiring education on a job description, that's privilege. You are writing privilege into your job description. And so yes, thank you, Josh.
Joy, were you going to say something? Thanks for that.
Nope. Jasmine and Jess have covered it, so yeah.
I'll add something, and I've been very lucky in my organization, Single Sprout. We've been able to leverage Jess and Jessica from Rise Journey, Joy, Jasmine, and obviously we'll be talking to Sarah and All Voices more. But I remember a conversation I was having with Jasmine, and she was talking about sharing in the job description that we really value people's opinions. We really value people coming from different backgrounds and what they have to say and their voice, and we want to hear it. And we want to have a culture of feedback. We want to have a culture of humility. We want to have a culture of feedback and a culture of learning, but we're encouraging people to speak up. And that might be something that's very small, but in the job description Jasmine mentioned, I thought that was brilliant and something just very small to add, but I think helpful. What role does technology play in creating an inclusive job description? This is for
Yeah. So, I mean, technology, obviously, most of us are in tech environments. So, we're doing a lot of hiring. And I think, when we're writing these job postings, we have some level of bias, whether we want to admit it or not. And we have this, ideal candidate in mind that we think is, we're going to find. And we may neglect to take a step back and actually review the job description and look at the language and, is it gender neutral? Does it attract people from different backgrounds? Those types of things. So I do think that technology can help with that. And Jess mentioned already in the chat about Textio. I've heard of another organization called Data People that also does a review of your job descriptions and highlights things that you may want to change so that you have language that's going to attract a more diverse pool of candidates. So I do think it has a place. I know that there's, sometimes a dark side to technology as well when it comes to these types of things. So you always have to be mindful of that. But I definitely think that there can be some benefits when you use technology in job descriptions. So.
Thanks, Joy. Do you think, do you ever look at who built the technology, the team that built it? What's the makeup of the team?
Yeah, you know how I feel about all of these things, Natan. So I like to do a little bit of research and see, who's building these algorithms, what are their backgrounds, because, the type of data that, or the algorithm that they built, it might have some type of bias built into it. So you want to be thoughtful about that when you're choosing your technology partner if you choose to use technology to help you with job descriptions. So I do think it's appropriate to do a little bit of research on their backgrounds.
I mean, and I think that's another point to what Jasmine was saying earlier, which is who's on the team. Mm-hmm. Who's on the team? Who am I working with? That goes both ways, not just for whose company I'm interviewing at, but whose technology I'm using. Because if the technology is built by a homogenous group, the same type of people, maybe that's not the right technology to be using, or I want to learn more and dig more into what that company is actually doing or saying publicly.
Yep.
Anything to add there? Anyone?
Yeah, Natan, on that thread, and thinking about cost, because everybody always talks about cost and DEI and budget, and the dreaded DEI budget always comes up. These are tools that are built with inclusive demographics of people, mindsets, backgrounds, must be invested in. It is worth spending a little bit extra for a tool that's going to be better and more inclusive and built with that mindset from the get-go. rather than investing in the cheapest one. That is part of why DEI needs to be built into everything. That is why it's not just about one person's budget, but really interviewing, looking at the background. And that is part of the tools that are going to support hiring underrepresented talent, retaining underrepresented talent. Somebody mentioned ERGs and boosting the ERGs, because you can talk about why you chose that tool. You can say, we invested in a higher power tool because it does these things. Can be part of your story. And so really digging into that on every platform, not just recruitment related platforms, but think about all of the technology we use. Who built those technology pieces? To your point, Natan, like if it's a homogenous group of people, it's probably gonna only, cater to a homogenous group of people.
And that's once again another thought around what tools are you using. Something that's very easy. A company of 2 people can publish that. People publish their sales stack, their customer service stack, publish your DEI stack. Who are you working with? What are you doing? That's one step forward. If you don't have the group yet, you don't have the people talking about it yet. Moving on to sourcing, one of my favorite topics. One thing I think we do really well at Single Sprout. This is for Sarah. Companies are competing for different types of underrepresented talents. What are some of the partners you've had success with, or know people that have had success with?
So I have a lot of thoughts on sourcing. I really feel like if you're building an equitable company, people are going to know and they're going to come to you. However, I will say that when we're thinking about partnerships, and when I thought a lot about partnerships at Toast, the company I was working with before, Cypress, is who is the organization, like who started the organization, and is the organization serving the community that it's a part of? So, you have a lot of organizations that, claim to be helping with diversifying your pipeline. But then you look at their leadership team or their co-founders, and it's a bunch of very white people. And so, I think it's really important to make sure that you're doing due diligence and looking into partners that are really serving the community they are a part of. So a great example, and this is a Boston-based organization, but it's G Code House, and they are it's for women of color to learn how to code, and the whole process is very thoughtful. And Toast has a partnership with them, but it's going beyond the partnership too, right? It's actually creating a two-way street so that you're really thinking about how the company and the organization are serving each other. It's not one way, because you have to work together. So what a partnership really looks like matters too. And so, I'm not really answering your question because I'm not listing out a bunch of organizations, but G Code House is amazing. NSBE is amazing. Lesbians Who Tech is amazing. I think just really thinking very strategically about the types of people you want to bring into your company, and then looking very thoughtfully about in the organizations that are there, but who started them. And like I said, if you're doing a really good job internally creating a culture that's helping different types of people thrive truly, then you're going to have no issue like really finding different types of people to come work at your company. So that's my thought. I'm totally open to let someone else answer too, but
No, thank you. I appreciate that, Sarah. And I think it's important, and something that we mention to companies that we work with as well is, and I want to go back, because not everyone has a diverse group of founders, different backgrounds. It is a priority. It's becoming more of a priority, thankfully. But you can always go out and find organizations, nonprofits that want your help, that need your help, that are looking for volunteers. Why not go out, do a little partnership with them or a big partnership with them? And that's one step forward. And there's so many out there. Does anyone else, Joy, Jess, Jasmine, have any other organizations or suggestions or something that people can take away today?
I have a recommendation, Black Remote She. That is one organization that focuses on the transgender community. And, I think that, they have some great candidates and are definitely great partners. So I would recommend them. So.
Thanks, Joy. I also follow them. They're great on LinkedIn and on Instagram. Question for you. What's one way to stand out, assuming you want to do more outreach? What's one way to stand out in your messaging?
Yeah. So I think it's about being authentic, right? And trying to find a way to connect with that candidate in a way that they're going to appreciate it. Because we've all been candidates, and we've all, been a part of the interview process. And, the emails that you open and that you read, those are the ones where you're like, oh, that person did some research on me or figured out something that I'm interested in or shared something would kind of pull me in. So I think that's, what I would recommend is don't just send like the basic generic email and then go right into what the job description is. Like take a moment to say, hey, I saw you were on this panel and you talked about these things. Let me tell you about what our company is doing. And I think that, everybody also wants to like do a little blurb about their company. I think that you can, provide maybe a link to some of your social media pages, a blog, something that's going to be really interesting to that candidate, that also tells a story about who your company is. So I think that those things are, appropriate, and especially when I think about engineers who get like lots and lots of emails. So, trying to find a way to really connect with them in a very authentic way is going to be super helpful with that.
Authenticity, I think, is super important. Obviously, if you know someone they know, that can be helpful as well. The social media point, I think, is a fantastic point and something that I'm seeing more companies do. We certainly do, which is, hey, we're reaching out to you. If you're not interested, at least follow us, take a look, engage with us, see if you like what we're saying. And maybe it's not for you, maybe it's someone else. But I feel very grateful that I've been able to learn so much from you, Joy, and from Jasmine, and from Jess, and from Sarah. And these are little tidbits that we can take away and we can put on our social media, and we can link to these organizations to show, hey, we care, here's some action, donate, get involved. It's a small step, but it's something that you could do today. Anyone want to add anything in terms of sourcing, outreach, messaging?
Natan, I'll jump in. I love your idea of, I knew that tech companies publish their tech stack, but publishing your DEI stack, I've never heard that before. And I think that's a really cool idea and can be done on social and sharing who you partner with. That's part of your story. Maybe you can only partner with one organization. That's okay. This is not about quantity, but quality. And just really want to quickly point out on the opposite end of the recruitment funnel, when you're rejecting candidates, don't ghost candidates. Just send them a rejection email. Say thank you. We appreciate your time and your energy. Interviewing sucks. And I know we all get overwhelmed when we work in recruitment, but it's so vital. And when you talk about authenticity and brand, if you're like all good and gung-ho throughout the entire interview process and then you freaking ghost them, it's all out the window. You put in all of that energy and money and support for nothing, because it'll come back to bite you in the ass. So just like, be respectful. This is people's time and energy, and that is part of being an authentic employer, is rejecting people kindly and appreciating them. So I just really want
to 100%.
That's a great point. Jess, I'm so glad that you called that out. And Joy, to your point, kind of around, when this reach out messaging is happening, ensuring that recruiters or the talent acquisition space is finding that bridge when they're reaching out to specific candidates. I think that is so important, because from my experience, I've had so many different employers actually reach out for jobs that I am not qualified for, or my resume shows nothing to be in alignment with it. And it begs the question, are you reaching out to me because I am an underrepresented talent for you? Or are you reaching out to me because you think that I could actually add value to your organization? And so one piece of that I'll say about this is also, within the messaging, it should be very clear on why you're reaching out to this person. Why do you think that they can add value to your organization? What do they have that you currently don't have? Because the last thing you also want to do is make someone feel as though they're only being reached out to for a quota. And I've felt like that numerous times.
Truth. Thank you for sharing that. And I think that happens. I think that happens quite a bit. And I see it on our side. I think as we follow through with that, there is now pressure, thankfully maybe, to hire underrepresented talent. I guess as a follow-up to that, I have a few thoughts, but I want to get into referrals. How do we ensure that referrals is a positive contribution, right? Because when I think about referrals, often we think about people that are similar to ourselves. And if a company doesn't have a diverse background, diverse set of people, we might wind up in the same place that we were at before. So that's for Sarah, and then I have a
I mean, I think, I have a love-hate relationship with referrals, and I do think it goes back to what does your organization look like? Because if you have a really, like you said, if you have a very homogenous organization, racially homogenous, gender identity homogenous, whatever, you're going to likely end up having a very homogenous set of referrals. So it's just being really intentional with when you roll that out, how you roll that out, and what your company looks like when you are planning to roll out a referral program. I would love to actually hear from other panelists on their thoughts on this. But that, I feel like it's just timing, and it's a balance of just making sure that you're also not, there's not a favoritism attached to a referral as well. So making sure that if a referral comes through, they follow the process, and standardizing that interview process is imperative, because it really helps mitigate that bias. And if you have this person at your company who's doing an amazing job and they refer someone in, that's great, wonderful. And that person should follow the same interview process that any other candidate is going through. So those would be my two.
Thanks, Sarah. We're going to get in. I see a question, and we're talking about an interview process, interview questions. Casey, we'll get to that in just a second. Following up on that, I've seen recently some organizations offering bonuses for people of color or underrepresented talent who are placed. What are your thoughts on that? Jasmine, Joy, Jess, would love to hear your thought. I'll start with Jasmine.
Thank you. So I will flat out say that I am not okay with that. I am not a fan of that at all for multiple reasons. I can understand the reasoning behind it. And I think that a lot of employers think that if they offer an additional incentive to bring in underrepresented talent, that maybe they'll start seeing more in the pipeline. But please, if there are any employers on the line, do not do this. I think that number one, you need to be empathetic and think about the messaging that you're actually sending to these underrepresented employees who will be coming in. If I were them and I knew that I was only really given a pure equitable chance at a role because someone else was getting paid more, I would not feel good, A, about being in that role, and B, about working at the organization. I think number two is doing that continues to perpetuate the fact that underrepresented employees, people of color, et cetera, aren't qualified, and they don't have the capability to just show up as they are and meet the credentials that are needed for a role without having a dollar sign attached to our heads. And I think that the bigger problem here is the fact that going back to some of the things we talked about, ensuring that your JD is inclusive, ensuring that you're being open from different backgrounds, ensuring that you're being open, that there's more than one way to do things. If you have that approach, I think that will help to attract more people of color. But if you go about the approach of saying, hey, let's put a bounty on them and you get additional dollars if you bring them in, that is not the answer, because what isn't being looked at is how are we retaining them? How are we engaging them? How do we ensure that they like the job, that they're happy? And there's no metrics around that, right? But the dollar sign is just bringing them in. And that seems to be more of a benefit for the employer than it would be for the new employee and the rest of the organization. I just had to say that. I'm not a fan of that.
Thank you.
Well said, Jasmine. Well said. Like, I totally echo that. Like, this keeps coming up and I'm surprised by it. And it's like, why would I want to work at a company where that's what they're trying to do? Like, yeah, and then you get me here, right? But you haven't done the work internally as well to see or understand why that is so bad that you are paying people more for them to recruit someone that looks like me. So, yeah, I'm totally against the practice in all ways.
It's a good note for everyone. If your company is doing this, if you're seeing other companies do this, stop. Just stop. Just don't do it. I have a follow-up question to that, and I get it, the word bounty. Just to play devil's advocate, is there some way to incentivize your team outside of money? Or is that just completely off limits? Because do you want people going out of their way? I think kind of referral bonus, sometimes companies make them very high and they say, hey, go out of your way to bring in qualified people. Jasmine, to your point, it can say, hey, these people aren't qualified. But is there a way to incentivize the team in some way, or is that totally off limits?
I want to jump in from an L&D perspective. If you're doing this, immediately reallocate those bonuses, those bounties to L&D. You want to retain your people of color. You want to retain your underrepresented talent. You want them to go to their friends and say, you need to come work here, because that's how you're going to get the talent. It's going to be in our notes somewhere, somebody wrote whisper networks. It's all about connecting to their people, because you're more likely to have people who look like you, who sound like you. That's just part of our innate biases that we have as human beings and the places we live in. If you really want to get people of color in your talent pipeline, invest in them from day one. Give them career pathways, give them mentors, give them sponsorship. Make sure C-suite have eyes on every single person of color in your organization. You have to invest in them. It's going to be multiple percent return for investment versus, and honestly, the word bounty makes me think of slavery, like versus buying them. Invest in them versus buying them. It's a huge difference.
Thank you. Thanks, Jess. Anything else from Sarah, Jasmine, Joy?
The only thing, oh, no, please go ahead, Sarah. Please, no.
I was just going to quickly say, if you have to incentivize your employees, then you're doing something wrong. Like, there should never need to be a reason you have to incentivize people to come work at your organization. That means that you are not doing something well. And, the culture of your company is based on the worst behavior that is tolerated. And I have to, I'm just so against incentives on completely to my core. So
thank you.
I'm just going to, you said it perfectly, Sarah. That's exactly what I was going to say. There should never be any need to incentivize anyone to bring in people of color. If that is happening, that is a big red flag. And that means that there needs to be a shift in how the organization thinks about people of color, not only from their capabilities and their qualifications as a new hire, but also where they are in the world. That's a bigger, broader issue. Thanks, Sarah.
Thank you. I'm learning today. I'm going to go reevaluate us, on incentives, and we don't have an incentive at Single Sprout for people of color. That being said, I love what Jess said in terms of reallocating those dollars into L&D and retention and people being there and wanting to be there.
Natan, can I just jump in for one thing? Yeah. Because I feel like a lot of times with DEI related webinars, employers or potential employers get a lot of, oh, no, don't do this. No, don't do that. And I think it's really important to note that you can always be learning and you can always be changing, and you can do something incorrect and change and shift gears and say, you know what, I recognize that this wasn't the right path. I'm going to acknowledge it and we're going to move forward in this direction. And that is probably the most vital part about this journey, is recognizing and then moving forward. It's okay if you're not doing something right. It's okay if you're not doing anything at all, but listen to the incredible other, women and people on this panel and all of the other incredible people in your life who are giving you advice and support, and just recognize and shift gears. And that's okay if it's not happening right now.
Thank you. Moving on to the interview process. How do we ensure hiring managers are trained on unconscious bias? Jess?
Train them. Make unconscious bias training, which for the record should be the absolute lowest bar of training. Just like we have sexual harassment training, unconscious bias should be the mandatory. You train somebody on that within the first 30 days or 60 days of them being hired. Microaggressions are a really hot word right now, hot topic right now. Train them. Get somebody in there. Get whether it's an automated system or live training. It doesn't matter. Make sure it starts and it doesn't stop. Unconscious bias training shouldn't be an hour-long training that you do and then you're like, cool, next. Have a 12-part series. Partner with a consultant. Find something online. Create a book club. Get LinkedIn Learning. It doesn't really matter how. It just matters that you are doing and you are constantly working on it. Because you're not going to take an unconscious bias training and then move on and be like, cool, I'm done. I'm bias free. We all have bias. It's real. We're human. It's totally cool as long as you're aware and you're growing. Hiring managers, it needs to absolutely, end of story, start with hiring managers, but it cannot end there. But again, I go back to the end. What do you want? To Sarah's point, who's kind of the lowest bar in your organization, and how do you shift that mentality? How do you shift that behavior? And how do you help everybody, even if everybody's at different places, create a bar and then bring everybody to that bar, and then raise that bar and bring everybody to that bar? So keep going on that point, but invest money. Take those referral bonuses for people of color or underrepresented talent, invest it in L&D. And that should be in every budget, every year, guaranteed, no questions asked.
I love that. What are, obviously, Rise Journey, Jess and Jessica, you've been amazing. We've learned so much from you. Look them up. They are awesome. Any tools, any free tools, anything that's like low cost? I'm thinking of our early stage people that want to, get involved, but they might not have the dollars to do it. Where can they get started? Where can they start learning? Where can they start educating their team? Feel free, anyone, to jump in.
Google, internal panels, listen to your people. If you can create a culture of psychological safety, at Quartet, we've done a number of internal AMAs around disability, around being a Black woman in the workplace. Your people have incredible stories that are sad and humbling, and ensure resilience. You need to really listen to the people internally in addition to external things. It's not always from the outside. It's often from the inside. And also book clubs. There's a million books out there. I'll drop a link in the chat for.
Yeah, and I would just add on to that as well that something that can be done that's free is just having real conversations. To Jess's point about experience, I think just hearing other people's stories in itself provides an education and an awareness that other people, of no matter who you are, may not understand or know. So I think that there's value in that. I think also from a cultural perspective, when we were talking about the unconscious bias piece, it not only is it training, it's also about holding people accountable, and creating a culture where employees feel comfortable saying, hey, you said that to me the other day. It didn't make me feel that great. And this is why. I think a lot of times in cultures, sometimes, things are said and done and we feel very unafraid to speak up for ourselves, or we feel very afraid to advocate for others. So creating a space where employees can show up as they are, no matter who they are, I think is really important from a cultural perspective.
Yeah, and I would also add, though, for the smaller organizations, try and leverage your PEOs because they often have some training that you can do. We previously used TriNet, and they had a really good harassment training that went beyond harassment and went into amplification and, biases and all sorts of things. So that might be a place to start if you don't have the funds to go out and get a partner.
Thanks, Joy. What are some do's and don'ts of creating an inclusive interview process? And we still have time. I know I'm seeing some questions on the side. I'd love to get to them and really some important points there. Just want to finish out the questions that we have scheduled. So this one's for Jasmine. Do's and don'ts of creating an inclusive interview process, format, structure, how do we make it work if your team is homogenous, of the same background? A lot of companies are like that, but they're trying to get better.
Yeah, I think like zooming out and looking at it holistically, talking about just ensuring that the company and employees are all on the same page as much as possible about understanding the importance of DEI, understanding why it's here, why it matters, et cetera. I think first there needs to be an alignment of that. And then on a more granular level, from a interview formatting perspective, it's important to have people involved in the interview process of different departments, of different levels, et cetera. I think sometimes, depending upon who the hire is, maybe only senior leadership folks will be a part of the interview process. I think it's important to diversify that. Also, I would say also probably the biggest part is ensuring that talent acquisition has a conversation with the recruiting panel first to say, these are the things that we need to be open to. These are the things that we need to think thoughtfully about when having this conversation, because oftentimes there's not alignment with different interviewers about what they're looking for. So maybe all three interviewers are looking for the exact same thing. And so there's red flags that could have been missed. So I think giving each one of the recruiters or interviewers a role to say, you're actually going to be looking at this, you're going to be identifying this, I think that will play a part. But I am not the subject matter expert at this, and I would love to hear the rest of the panel's thoughts on the subject.
Sarah, anything there?
I didn't know if Joy had anything to say. I'd love to hear from, not to put you on the spot, Joy.
No. I think Jasmine covered all the bits that I would have covered. And I definitely find the process to be a lot better when people have structured interviews where people are focused on different things. It's just great from a candidate experience as well. So I think that the worst thing you can do is just be in the interview unprepared and not understand the role and what the manager's looking for, because I've had a few of those, and it's a complete turnoff, honestly, to be in a part of that interview process. So I would just echo everything that Jasmine has already said.
Joy, just following up on that, do you think companies should be publishing their interview process, sharing like, hey, these people are asking these questions, just to give people a heads up? Do you think that's helpful?
I think it's going to vary. I'm not sure if there's like a right or a wrong way to do that, but if it can help the candidate be better prepared, I don't think it necessarily hurts. It just allows them to be better prepared. Some people will take advantage of it, others may not. But I think it can vary by the organization. So.
Okay. Following up on that, going into the questions, should you highlight focus on anything different when interviewing underrepresented talent? And following up from Manny's question, which I think is relevant here, what are better ways to ask people about their thoughts on cultural responsiveness and cultural humility? And I think he means in the interview process. So asking potential candidates that, or asking people in the interview process about the company.
Well, I think I've shared my experience, or like I had a friend that was interviewing at a larger tech firm, and it's almost, I kind of guess what Jasmine was talking about earlier, where you kind of were just almost felt like you were only there because you were the diversity candidate, and it just made her feel very awkward and uncomfortable. And so, she kind of like ruled them out. So I don't think that you should change your focus and your highlights. You're looking at, you're focused on the job, right? So if you've written this job description the way that it's supposed to be, where it's inclusive, and you've been very thoughtful and structured in your interview process, every single candidate should get that same type of interview, no matter their background, because it's about the role that you're trying to fill. And maybe you do want to, if the candidate is asking, maybe you do want to emphasize some of the things that they might be interested in that may tie back to diversity. And then I guess when it comes to asking someone about cultural responsiveness, cultural humility. I think that, I guess it's just asking people like, what's important to you? What do you value in an organization? What type of culture are you looking for? And kind of seeing what comes out of that response. But I welcome the other panelists to join in.
Yeah, I think just to piggyback off of what you said, Joy, another thing too is also like, and we talked about this a little earlier, rethink your profile. Who are you? How are you creating this job description, and who is it going to be tailored to? And are you really thinking about the skills of the human, or are you thinking about pedigree and an ideal image of, or like who is creating like what performance looks like, what strategy means? These definitions can go a really long way. So even challenging what the answers to the questions that you have in your interview look like and feel like, and what the essence of what you're looking for can help significantly. And so just really challenge that profile.
Anyone want to add anything when it comes to interview process, interview questions?
Natan, somebody in the chat mentioned the Rooney Rule, and there's also the Mansfield Rule. I think there's a lot of different pieces, and honestly, it's going to have to be organization to organization because generally goals work better than quotas. And so, but I do think when you look at the studies of, if you have one person of color or underrepresented group, underrepresented talent in the pipeline versus 2 or 3, the odds are going to go up that you're going to hire somebody who isn't white. And so I think it's really important to look at the data. And again, going back to Sarah's point, looking at what your organization needs in the profile and starting there is where you should start. And then look up those rules, look at the data, look how it's improved or changed to other organizations, and then make the decision based on what's best for your.
Let's get to some questions in the chat. Just working my way up from Diana. Ways to be inclusive and broaden candidate pools and organizations with very specific BFOQs, which I actually don't know what that stands for. If someone knows, or Diana want to share with us.
Bona fide occupational qualifications. So if these are actual job responsibilities aren't nice to have. So, yeah.
Thanks, Joy. Anyone want to take that one?
Diana, I think, ultimately you want to hire, and if I'm understanding the question, you want to hire the right people. Figure out where you're looking. Where are you recruiting? It's oftentimes really easy to have blinders on when you say, okay, well, we can't find any Black engineers, so we're not going to hire any Black engineers, or that's why we don't have it. There's a lot of times where you just need to broaden where you're looking. Panels like this are great. Reach out to your HR networks, especially others who are in similar kind of organizations or looking for similar roles. It's harder because there's been a lot of systemic issues that have blocked a lot of people from getting to places of success and getting those pieces. So I think you have to be significantly more intentional about where you're searching and where you're putting your money, especially when it comes to recruitment, and figuring out who your partners are. Does that mean you should go to a college or university, maybe an HBCU, and say, you have a program that has these people with these talent or these qualifications, we want to invest in an internship program. And so it might be a long game thing. This might be a 5-10 year game. That's not the intention. I mean, to play, but you need to be thinking about that now, because not everything's going to happen tomorrow. And that's a huge part of this work, is saying, what can I line up for that's going to show me a win in the next 6 months, the next 12 months, the next 2 years, the next 5 years. There's not an easy solution to that question by any means, though.
How do we feel about feedback in the interview process? We see companies that don't want to provide feedback. We see companies that do. Is this something that companies should be doing, and to what extent?
I think yes, absolutely. It is so important. And the more transparent a company can be, the better. I mean, as I believe Jess said, interviewing sucks. It does. It really sucks. And especially when you are interviewing with a bunch of different companies, and I've had this happen where they're like, we really can't tell you why you didn't get the role, but you did great. And it's like, well, that gives me nothing. And it's, in my opinion, just a really lazy way of, just managing the interview process. And so, it's also, it just leaves a bad taste in your mouth when an organization doesn't have the time to at least give you some, very tangible ways that you can improve, because ultimately interviewing is all about how you sell yourself. And you can have someone who is a horrible interviewer and actually a really amazing employee. So, I think that there's a lot of, I personally think that there's a lot of benefit to it. And I think it's also, when companies don't give employee or candidates feedback, it can hinder, growing a more diverse group of people into the organization. It can definitely act like a barrier. Is a barrier to inclusion, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think that that's great, Sarah, and I would echo everything that you said. I would also add that if organizations are going to go down that route, which I 100% think that they do, there needs to be some type of coaching to recruiters who will be giving the feedback back to candidates, because how you present the feedback is super important. And I think it's critical to make sure that you're not sharing the feedback from an opinionated perspective. It's more so about there was still more room for the panel to understand more about your experience related to this. Like, to your point, very tangible feedback so that they can take that on to the next interview, versus they didn't like this, or we had other candidates that did that. That is not a productive conversation to help someone continue to grow in their career.
And to Joey's point earlier about structured interview processes, this is why having scorecards and structured interview processes is so important. One, so you can just understand who's good for the role, but also if you do need to give feedback. And my thought, again, as from the L&D side, is saying if a recruiter can't give a candidate good and productive feedback, like Jasmine and Sarah have said, it probably means that they can't give that to their internal coworkers, or they can't give feedback well to anybody else in the company. So that's part of training internally, how to give feedback, how to receive feedback. And again, it says a lot about your culture if you're an organization that can say, wow, that wasn't the best feedback, but this person knew how to deliver it, and I understand it's by best intention and positive impact. And so really being thoughtful about that. And it goes a long way. Again, same to rejecting your candidates. By providing feedback, it leaves them with a good feeling, even if they did, or hopefully leaves them with a good feeling, even if they didn't get the job. And that's a legacy that follows a.
Especially, I'll go on the feedback part, especially as a candidate goes deeper into the process and they've invested more time, and maybe they've done a project or presentation or spent several hours. You kind of, in the tech world, you owe them feedback. I'm just thinking from a tech perspective of a tech project to help them. Here's where you went wrong. Here's where you went right. Here's where you can get better. It does take some time, but at least you put some time into it as well. And as they did, you kind of matched them there. How one other, we have a few more questions. How do you boost engagement in your organization around DEI and hiring and internally and getting people to do the work? Not everyone wants to do the work. People advocate for it. It's a priority, but when it comes to actually doing the work, and I've learned a lot from Jess here, there is a lot of work to do. So how do you encourage it or get more engagement out of your team?
I definitely want to hear from Jasmine and Sarah on this too, but DEI is so unsexy. The work that actually goes behind it takes forever. It's a lot of laborious back-end work, and it's only that front-end sheen when you actually can hire and retain underrepresented talent, when you can get people's voices, when you can have good feedback cultures. That's the cool part about DEI. It isn't the work that actually goes into it, and I think there's a lot of misnomers on that. I think transparency, saying exactly what's entailed in this, saying if you want a leadership opportunity or jump in, let's work with your manager to make sure that we can give you the bandwidth to do so, and then jump in. If ERGs want to be part of the recruitment cycle, bring them in. Hell yeah. What a great way to get other feedback and other people into the process. You need to do so in a strategic and a structured way, but people are asking to be involved. All you need to do is say, yes, let's figure out how. It's like improv class. You say yes and. If you can, as a leader, start saying yes and versus no but or no it's going to dramatically change what happens when it comes to DEI within.
Sarah, Jasmine, anything to add there?
I keep looking at Sarah. I'm like, do you want to go? Do you want to go? Yeah, no, I 100% agree with Jess. I'm thinking from my perspective, I think there's different elements of people wanting to be engaged in the topic, and I think it's important to recognize the levels of engagement. The baseline being everyone plays their part, everybody is accountable. There are certain people, employees who may raise their hand proactively and say, I want to be more involved than just this. I want to do all these things. Bring them along the journey, embed them in all the different processes that you have within the organization. There are a lot of people that are within these companies that care about this, that are passionate about it, but they can actually provide some great contributions, but they don't get a seat at the table. They don't get to implement their ideas. Their ideas are oftentimes, ignored. So give them a voice. And then for the people who align with it, but may not be ready to jump in and participate, acknowledge that too, but also hold them accountable to say, look, you may not want to, be on this ERG, or you may not want to lead this project, but at base level, we expect you to be accountable. We expect you to be engaged. We expect you to be respectful. That's just how it is. But I think recognizing and not forcing it on all employees is really important, because when it's forced, the whole purpose is gone. Like, it just defeats everything.
Yes. And like everything that's been said. And when you have employees participating in extra work to ensure that this is moving forward, pay them. This is not something that should be done for free, especially if it's not their job. And this means being actively participating in employee resource groups. If your employee resource groups are interviewing, pay them for their time. Time is precious. It is the one thing you cannot get back. And this is, it can be very emotional. So just make sure that you're really leaning into that. The second piece is, just being really upfront with, this is table stakes. These are the baseline expectations. Again, going back to like the company culture is based on the worst behaviors that you tolerate, because those influence the experience of everyone. And so when you're really thinking about how you talk about this work, it's not a program, it's not an initiative, it is a mindset. It is a movement, and your organization must be dedicated to it. And so when you think about like, do we want to offer free beer, when we go back to an office, if that happens, maybe rethink where that money goes, and it actually goes into paying your employees who are spending extra time doing this work. And I'm a really big advocate of that. And if you don't have the dollars, what about equity? There's always a way. And those are the ways that you show these people that this is, whoever is involved, that this is important. And leaders need to be equally involved and equally there to ensure that this is moving forward. So that's.
Thanks, Sarah. That was awesome. I want to dig into something that I find a challenge in recruiting, and I think it goes above us often to leadership teams and board and the venture capital community. But companies have targets to hit. They have milestones to hit based on their product, based on their service, based on their recruiting needs, their marketing dollars. And sometimes that gets in the way.
Bullshit.
I'll put it into what I'm hearing, not what I'm saying is me, right? That gets into those priorities. How do you advocate for that at the level, at the individual level, at the manager level, when those dollars potentially are on the line?
That's BS that dollars are on the line, because we all know all of the studies that have been out there about more diverse organizations perform better. This is a moot point. We need to move beyond this conversation of, oh, we don't have enough money, or oh, we can't invest it. This is a long game, folks. I don't care if you're the oldest, whitest, most privileged dude. Like, get on the board with this train, because it's going to leave you behind. And if you want to make more money for yourself, for your friends, for your peers, for whomever, you got to make yourself a more diverse organization, a more inclusive organization. Those bad behaviors Sarah mentioned, those have impact. Those impacts are the things you tolerate, not just the behavior, but the impact and the outcome of that. And people will leave. Retention is a huge, and attrition is the biggest loss of money. Why wouldn't you invest in a DEI consultant or hire somebody internally to do this work? It means you retain these people and you do money. I call bullshit on anybody who says it's about the money that they are or not investing, because diverse companies perform better. And I know the anger is not at you, Natan. It's out.
Yeah, I appreciate that. But just to go back to the level, because I don't know if we want people going to their managers and saying this is bullshit. What are tangible ways for people before they leave the company or before they advocate against something that might not be good for everyone or for DEI? What are some practical ways today that you can go to your company and you can talk about this and hopefully make change?
Position it, I'm all about reframing. I think there's so much value when you can understand the benefit. And as just mentioned, companies do have more diverse people working in, or have a more diverse representation of people. They do perform better, but why? And also, I think bring more people into the conversation. This is when I see myself, this is like when allyship really comes in. Right. So, as a white woman, who can I go talk to in leadership and bring into this conversation so they can understand the value in a way that they can personally connect to? I think that goes all the way up to your board. So it doesn't, these conversations shouldn't stop at your C-suite. They need to go beyond the C-suite. And it needs to go into, because ultimately being in a tech company that is backed by a VC, those investors are really dictate or running, a lot of how the company performs. And so if this is something that's really important to the organization, bring that board in and really think about what that board looks like. And if they are largely white and largely male, this is an opportunity for you to really think about how those conversations will start to become, a thing, and they should become a thing. Because they likely are not, right, when they're talking strategy. And so I think it's just being really strategic, tying it to the strategy, bringing more people in, and if you happen to be in a position where you are, able to be an ally or active ally, do it. I think the conversation is really important and it has to be there.
Yeah, and I would completely second everything that's been said. Also, baking it into the values of the organization. Like at Thinks, one of our values is be human, and that value drives so much. I would also say it's really important to, sometimes I think that there's one thing that I've learned that is I think that there's a gap in people caring, right? And so sometimes people don't care about something unless it impacts them. And so oftentimes you have, underrepresented talent within an organization who is feeling things, who is aware of things that maybe other people are not. And if you have a primarily undiverse senior leadership or undiverse board, they have no idea and are not thinking, or at least not prioritizing, that this is happening or that is happening, and my talent that looks like this may be feeling like this. And so I think it's important for people to zoom out and say, okay, these things are happening. Who is owning the communications around this? Who is having the conversation? Is it the person of color in the organization that's writing the communication? Is it the person of color in communication, a person of color that's flagging that these things are happening? If that's happening, that's 100% a problem, and that needs to be escalated. And the board and the senior leadership folks need to know what's happening on quote unquote the ground. Because at this point, most organizations aren't just ignoring when things are happening. They're doing something about it. It may look differently, but if there's a disconnect between leadership not understanding the needs and people of color, Black people, people with different abilities, Latinx, whatever, are feeling this, there's a problem here. And And I think, again, kind of making sure that people have a voice is important, like allowing people to speak up and say, I may be the person of color, but it's not my responsibility to own this, that, and the other. It's your responsibility. It's everyone's responsibility. And I also want to say that it's very important that senior leadership and the board are fully invested in educating themselves on how to get more learning on diversity, equity, inclusion. It's one thing to say, maybe we can't relate to it. Maybe, I don't know what that experience feels like. So I want, this person and that person to help. Fine. Okay. Now it's been a year, or now it's been 3 years, or fill in the blank. What have you done in that time frame to educate yourself? The onus is on you to understand what the experience looks like and to put yourself in somebody else's shoes, especially if you are going to be a leader within an organization that is diverse. It's your responsibility to ensure that everyone feels like they have a safe space. And you need to, as high as you are, it doesn't matter. You need to have a voice within the organization to know how people are feeling, and you need to educate yourself to understand about it.
Amazing. Thank you. No,
very passionate about that.
Taught me so much, and I talked to her quite a bit. And just piggyback on what she's saying, as a leader, finding people that might not share the same views as you, following them, engaging with them, talking with them. People are open. Usually people want to educate. Usually people want to help. Jasmine, I'm very thankful for her. Every time I have a question, every time I want to learn more, she's totally open. And I recommend everyone out there to follow her, follow Jess, follow Sarah, follow Joy, follow people that don't look like you, follow people that don't sound like you. You'd be surprised. And that would be one step, I think, towards education, where we can learn so much and we can ask a lot more questions, and we should all be humble to that feedback and understanding more. So thank you, Jasmine. I really, really appreciate that. Any other questions? Anything else we want to touch on? This has been super helpful. I've learned so much myself. People have learned so much. We had almost 100 people here to take away, and you are all special, and I'm so thankful. And thanks to All Voices as well, obviously, for having us and their tool. Check them out. As Jasmine was saying, in terms of education and hearing what people say, they have a fantastic tool that gives employees an opportunity to share more when they might not feel comfortable going to their manager or HR. When they might not have a consultant, All Voices provides that. I would definitely check them out. I think we're good. Thanks so much, everyone. Thanks, Jasmine. Thanks, Sarah. Thanks, Jess. All Voices, Joy.